We are out here today to test the all-new E-Ride Pro SR. We have covered quite a few of this bike's specs in a previous unboxing video, as well as went over the app that you can use to tune this bike. So be sure to go and check that out if you want to dive deep into the specs and even some aftermarket parts fitment for this bike. But in this video, we are going to be actually testing the bike, bringing it to real-world use cases, and ultimately trying to find the best setup from the stock platform that you can use to make this bike extremely comfortable to ride. So my goal today is to try it on different types of terrain, get it tuned right, get the suspension feeling good, and give you my honest thoughts about how the E-Ride Pro SR performs. All right, first things first, I'm gonna dive into the app real quick and get it set up to kind of a base standpoint to begin testing. So I'm gonna turn off all of the sensors on this bike. I've already gone in, turned off the tilt sensor, the brake sensor, and the kickstand sensor. All of those kind of prohibit me from riding the way that I want to. So I'm gonna make sure that those are off. Now I did go ahead and unlock this bike to the full capability of 25 kilowatts. I'm gonna make sure that my race mode is turned all the way up to the full 25. I'm gonna put sport mode at around 60% there. This speed display adjust here is purely to adjust the speedometer and make sure that you've got the right tire size on. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep that where it is. A few things that I want to try to kind of tweak and fix is how the acceleration power band feels on this bike. I'm gonna try about 20% in race mode, see where that puts the power ultimately, and then get out and start testing it. I'm not gonna have any sort of speed limiter on this bike. I'm gonna make sure that in race mode, this bike has got the capability to go as fast as it can. So these are all the basic settings that I'm gonna start testing with. I'm not sure how it's gonna feel yet. I need some seat time, so I'm gonna get out there and test it right after this. All right, so suspension adjustment wise, I'm gonna start at a very central point. The fork has got 20 clicks of rebound, so I'm going to set it right in the middle. Just set it at 10, that's gonna be a good baseline to start. And it's got 13 clicks of compression. So I'm gonna go all the way in and back it out 6. That kind of also puts it pretty close to the center in terms of compression clicks, and I'm just gonna ride the fork right there where it is. And the rear shock has got 20 clicks of compression, which is the blue knob on top, and 10 clicks of rebound. So I'm gonna go ahead and set the rebound right to the center at 5 and the compression to 10 clicks. I'm not gonna mess with the preload yet because I haven't felt the balance of the bike. So I'm gonna go out and test that first, and then if I have to adjust the preload, I will. Drop the bass and hide away. I count money every day. Darkness in my vision's always night. It ain't never day. Bumps on my face, stacking money bigger. Going through the race, making haters sicker. Get up off my case, only about figures. Gotta get it all, never slip through my fingers.
Because this is a race bike, I'm going to ride it like a race bike. When I'm in race mode, I'm going to be sprinting, I'm going to be pushing myself and this machine, truly get a feel for it, because this throttle curve is designed to be ridden at high speed when you're in race mode. I've done a little bit more adjustment in the app. I started off at 20, at my throttle ramp being 20 out of 40%, I backed that down to 10. 10 felt pretty awesome, but now I'm down all the way to 8 because I am trail riding at such high speed, and 8 is killing it right now. The throttle's actually controllable. It feels pretty smooth. It is torquey. Like this bike, if you turn the throttle, it's going to go. You have to keep that in mind. So when you are on this bike, be ready to be racing, because in race mode, turned all the way up, that is the only thing that this bike is going to want to do, is just be an absolute unit of a machine and push as hard as it can. And it is insane how fast it is and how particularly good it is on the top end, and the torque that pulls you all the way to that top end. When you hit about a quarter throttle, it has got a power band like no other. And that top end, when you go from phase amps to field weakening, pulls so hard. But this bike is meant to be ridden that way. Whew, that was a big bottom. And it thrives in really high speed situations with that power curve. This bike is not for the faint-hearted. You got to be ready to ride it like you're a professional rider, because that's what it needs. It needs somebody that can control the beast and push it to its extremes, because it is fully capable of being absolutely insane. Holy crap! That is nuts. Alright, I have spent a pretty solid amount of time so far on the bike in its complete stock form. I haven't changed anything other than some suspension clickers and messed with the app to try to get it feeling good power-wise. And I gotta say, there's been a lot of remarks on the internet of things like the front end is too low and issues along those lines. The power's too uncontrollable, it's too twitchy. And there's a couple of things that I kind of agree with. I think the power is definitely, it could be smoothed out just a little bit more and have a little bit more adjustability in the app. But when I brought it down, I brought my power setting down to 8%. 8% is basically how aggressive the throttle is in race mode, turned all the way up. And mind you, I've been riding this bike in its highest setting this entire time. And I'm able to just climb up rocks and control the front end, balance well, and not feel like the throttle is getting away from me. But the bike comes alive when you need it to come alive. It is not the best power curve in the world. If you want the best power curve, you're gonna have to put an EBMX X9000 on this. You'll have way more adjustability range, and that's going to be kind of the ultimate solution. But I will talk to E-Ride about an update in the app to make the power a little bit more user-friendly for those that aren't quite full racers. Now, it would be good for E-Ride to make it a little bit more user-friendly for everybody, but why are you buying really high power numbers without being ready to really go and rock this bike out on the trail or the track? Now let's talk about what online has been saying with the front end being too low. That I actually do agree with, but it's really not that bad. It's not great, but you have a ton of front end traction, and you really need that weight to feel a little bit more forward to be able to keep the power to the ground on this bike. So I think there's a pretty good solution that I'm going to go back to the trailer and try. And you don't need anything but some tools to fix it and kind of get that front end pitched at a better angle. And then we'll see if that was the solution we were looking for. So let's go back to the trailer and make some adjustments.
Yesterday, I rode 27 miles on this bike trying to get a feel for things, seeing the pros and cons of everything about the bike. And I gotta say, it is a fast, powerful, really fun bike to ride, but there's definitely some things that you wanna do on the setup side of things to get it to be pretty comfortable. All right, so let's get into the power side of things. Adjusting this bike multiple times out on the trail, trying to get it to feel pretty good. This is where I ended up. I got the eco mode at a pretty beginner friendly zone at 40% of the power control. The sport mode power was up to 60%. Not really very beginner friendly at that point. This bike got really fast. Race mode, I just had all the way up. It's showing that it's at 80%. The app has got a little bit of a bug in it right now. I'm gonna talk to eRide Pro about correcting that bug, but currently it is at what it shows being 80% is actually 100%. That is the power all the way up. Coming down to the actual acceleration and throttle curve, because I had sport mode being a little bit less aggressive in its full power zone, I bumped it up to 10%. That is kind of where the power hits. And the race mode I brought down to 8%. Those were the zones that I kind of found the power curve to be the most manageable in those types of power settings. So it worked really well, but I gotta say, if you are in race mode on this bike, it is designed to be fast. It's designed to be extremely aggressive. It is pretty hard to control at times. I mean, this is a very, very powerful bike on a small chassis. Not oftentimes do you get about 33 horsepower out of something so small and so lightweight. So you have to keep that in mind. If you are bumping this into race mode, be ready to rock because the bike is extremely fast. Now, there are a couple of things power curve wise that I wish I could adjust in the app. I wish I could control the actual linearity of it and kind of change the mapping of the throttle. You cannot do that so far in the app. I am going to talk to eRide Pro about getting a more progressive feel because right now, the bike feels a bit like a two-stroke. When you flutter the clutch on a two-stroke, that power band hits, the bike pulls extremely hard at that point. This bike feels like that. You twist the throttle to a certain zone, the power hits hard. I want it to feel a little bit more like a four-stroke. This bike has got so much power. I want it to be pretty smooth throughout the entire push that you do. So with that being the case, we are definitely going to talk to eRide Pro and get that feeling a little bit better. All right, let's get into the actual handling and performance of this bike. It actually handles really well. There's a lot of people online talking about this bike being pitched pretty far forward, and I actually agree with that to a degree, mainly because the rear tire on this bike is so big. That 18-inch tire, they fit the biggest tire they possibly could onto there, and the traction on that tire is phenomenal, but beyond that point, it does kind of pitch the bike forward. So with that being the case, you'll feel a little bit of a tendency to push the front end. Kind of feels like you're understeering at times, but at the same time, because this bike is so aggressive and you need to keep your weight over the front of it to be able to put the power to the ground, it is stanced pretty okay in that. But I would still like to see some improvements, and here at Charge Cycle Works, that's what we do. We hop on a bike, we try to find solutions immediately to get these problems fixed. And I think I found one that is going to work straight out of the factory. All you need is some tools to correct it a little bit. So let's go ahead and show you how to correct the front end pitch of this bike. All right, looking at this front fork, there are a couple of things to note. One is the amount of space that you have here before it tapers off. That is your adjustability room. That is a huge amount of adjustability that you can get. However, here at the top, I can't really push it any further simply because this is all the way maxed out here at the top. So what I am going to do is, if you see here, there's a tiny spacer in there. I'm gonna pull that spacer out and put it on top of the triple clamp, move everything downwards. That way, when the triple moves down, the fork can also move down and raise the front end of the bike up. All right, now that I moved that spacer up here on top, look at how much more room we actually have to push the fork down closer to that taper at the bottom. That is going to raise the front end a significant amount, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, I sunk that back down. Front end is now raised. That is such a major difference between what it was before. This bike is going to feel a lot better when it comes to that bike being pitched forward. There is still additional room here. And with that additional room, we are going to develop a drop crown for this bike. That drop crown will really come in handy if you want to move to a 21-inch front wheel. which I would highly suggest doing with this 18-inch tire on the back and the high power nature of this bike. An 1821 setup is the ultimate goal, but for right now, to have a really nice corrective measure, just flip that spacer, give yourself a little bit more room on that top. After riding the suspension, I did find a good zone when it came to the clickers. I ended up at 8 out on the rebound, which means you go all the way in and 8 clicks out. And then on the compression, I ended up 5 clicks out. So that was a really nice zone. I found harmony in the trails I was riding, whether it was high speed or I got into some lower speed stuff. The fork felt pretty good at that zone. I am going to go back out now that I have kind of corrected the front end, and I'm gonna retest that. But as of right now, that's where I ended up after the first session. And when it comes to the rear end, compression wise, I ended up at 8 clicks out, and rebound wise, I ended up at 6 clicks out. But a big thing that I did was I changed the pitch of the bike with the preload. So I actually backed off the preload almost all the way. I've still got tension on that spring, but it was almost all the way out. That way the bike would squat a little bit more in the rear end, give me nice traction. When I adjust the front end, that preload is probably going to change, kind of help be a little bit more supportive at that point. But truth be told, the less preload you have on a bike, the more that you can feel the dampening work because it's not being restricted due to a spring bind. So the rear end felt really good at that stage, riding it completely stock out of the factory as it was set up. So now that the suspension has been kind of adjusted in the front, I am going to go back out. I'm going to retest. I'm going to see where the clickers end up. Power wise, I was happy with where I ended up power wise. Everything else about the bike worked really well. The brakes worked great. I really love the traction you get out of the tires. The chassis felt good. There is one thing that I am personally struggling with a little bit on this bike though, and that is the foot pegs. They are way too wide of a platform. I feel like my ankles can't really pivot the way that they would. So the one major upgrade that I would make to this bike right off the bat is just changing the foot pegs. Those foot pegs might work for people wearing tennis shoes. This is a really high powered bike. You don't want to wear tennis shoes while riding it. So I am going to change those foot pegs. Now my foot peg preference is definitely Warp 9's Elite foot peg. This is the foot peg that I usually run on the Ultra B. You can now run them on the smaller size bike. This foot peg is killer because it allows my ankle to pivot. It's still a really large platform, so that if you do like that across your foot, the ball of your foot is really supportive in that. The spikes on these foot pegs are incredible. They're interchangeable as well. And then the foot peg also rounds off on the edge. That makes it a lot easier for when I hit a rock or anything. It just deflects really nicely. Whereas this foot peg, it's kind of, you hit it and it hits hard and it puts a lot of that impact into the actual foot peg brace. So I am going to change these out. Not a fan of these. Really love this foot peg. This is my preference. To each their own when it comes to foot pegs, but this is a great design. There's one more thing that was bothering me quite a bit on this bike, and that is the noise that comes from the actual cover that goes over the jack shaft. So now that that cover is off, it is way quieter than it once was. Everything about that sounds normal, sounds the way that it should. Nothing is rubbing. Some people might say that you're going to flick more stuff up into the shock area. There's also a solution for that if you are concerned about it. There is a cover that you can put over your shock. Warp 9 makes this cover super easy. You can just take the Velcro off, put it right on. That will protect the shock from any sort of debris flying into it and kind of have more longevity for that shock. So if you are concerned about that cover not being there, this is a great solution to that. And then you won't have any sort of rubbing. It's easier to clean your jack shaft. Everything about that works a lot better. Bike setup is a very crucial thing. Of course, if you pull a bike straight out of the box, it's not going to feel up to par for you. There's one more thing that I do when it comes to bike setup, and I talked about this in the last video when I actually built the bike, is lever positioning. This is a huge determining factor to how your body is going to be stanced on the bike. Because this is aggressive, I run my levers in very far. I put them to an angle where my hand is very straight as I'm on it. So I kind of make a triangle shape. I bring that triangle shape out to the handlebar. That squares up my shoulders, and that's where I put my levers. So you're going to see my levers run pretty far inside on the handlebar. That way I've got them squared up, and it also helps in case of a crash. If you tip over, the bar end is going to take the hit. Your lever is not going to take the hit. So that is also a really nice feature to that. but getting your bike set up completely is going to benefit you majorly when it comes to riding it. So be sure to do a lot of setup, really get the bike feeling comfortable prior to really coming to a conclusion on how the bike feels, because there's so much you can do just straight out of the box to make it feel good.
Super nice about high-powered bikes and electric is that you can do some really insane hill climbs. I actually don't know if I can because it's like almost vertical at a couple of spots, but it's worth a shot. I mean, how fast this thing is, it'd be pretty epic if I can make it all the way up that mountain. Holy crap! Oh, it's loose! Let's go, let's go, let's go! With power to spare, that was sick! Yeah. Back down, which is almost scarier because it's so loose. You gotta control that speed. Yeah. Oh, I'm moving. Gotta make that corner. Yeah, drift into it. That is so much fun.
I just finished up doing a lot of riding and testing on this bike, and it was crazy the difference the front end made just moving it that little bit. I am excited for the option of a drop crown to be coming so that I can put a 21-inch wheel up front and get a really good feel out of this bike with wheels that are kind of meant to go with each other. I will say though, this 18-inch tire, it is really, really large. Every time I bottom out, it is rubbing underneath. Now, that's a pretty common thing on a motocross bike. You will see that happen. Anytime you fully bottom suspension out, it is gonna rub your fenders ever so slightly. Now, obviously, that's not the best thing in the world. If you move to a 16-inch rear tire, it will help pitch the bike even more and really stance this out nicely, but I am very, very happy with how it felt after making that change. It was really impressive that the stance of it was good, had great traction. I was able to rip on this thing. It felt awesome to be out there riding it. The power truly is exceptional. It really does come on strong. You have to be expecting that, but I am very happy with the bike. And once I got used to that power curve, I really started to fall in love with it because I was able to just pop and jump and really have a good time out here on the trails that I was riding. I will say the suspension is pretty soft for as high speed of a bike as this is. So all in all, I would like to get the suspension a little bit stiffened up for the type of riding that I do. But all in all, guys, a little bit of setup goes a long way. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the E-Ride Pro SR. I'm personally very stoked on the bike. There are some things I can work on improving, but I love this bike at the price point that it is. I had a great time riding it over the past couple of days and testing it, and hopefully those suspension settings and the app settings help you to enjoy this bike a lot more.